So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience and with all of your questions. You're not far from that drink, but we do ask for your attention. You know, another half hour, please. We've done I've done it slightly differently. There's quite a lot of content on the slides. We won't be reading out the slides, nor will we be discussing every point. But it's also a tool for people who look at the website and haven't been able to come. So it gives them an idea of what the presentations were about. So I'll be just sort of very briefly introducing the subjects, and then Adam will be commenting. My transitions don't work.
Oh.
Pity.
We had some dramatic
We had some rather
visuals.
dramatic effect visuals, but obviously it hasn't translated into Catalan.
They don't speak Spanish.
They don't speak Spanish or Catalan here, but it doesn't matter.
Sorry.
So we are summarising the symposium. And we started off with Daniel Templon, who gave us a fascinating keynote speech. It's his 50 years, in fact, 51 years now in business. And we talked about the way he started, in a basement, giving up his job as a gym teacher. When he moved to the upper gallery, it was a time when life was slower, and we will come back to that many times. No mobiles, no internet, waiting every 2 weeks to get a publication about art. So it was a fascinating beginning from no art background whatsoever. He built his business. One of the things that I thought was interesting was building through the generosity of other dealers. And of course, his relationship with Castelli was quite well known. What did you think of what he told us?
I thought it was interesting in that I wondered how much of that could be enacted today. If there is that still kind of generosity, particularly among the sort of more modestly scaled galleries, which I like to call modestly scaled because mid-size sounds like a rental car option to me. So I wonder if it can be done. I mean, one of the things that we do in a single venue gallery is that we have wonderful networks and relationships with galleries around the world, including Thomas Dane. And we do exhibitions together, and we share collectors together, and we want to keep that spirit alive, and I think that's really necessary, as opposed to feeling like you need to sort of take over the world and build outposts everywhere. The other thing that struck me from Danielle's conversation, as an American at least, were the differences in perception of the art world in France, in Western Europe, to the United States. I mean, it was interesting to hear him say things like the fact that the French cultural community did not want to accept American artists, and that he lived in this bubble in Paris, and it wasn't until he got to Kassel that he actually saw this other world that meant something. And he said it's interesting how things change, too, in terms of economic crises. He said in the U.S., when there's an economic crisis, it's immediate. Everything just stops. People just stop buying. So it was interesting for me, from that perspective, to hear the differences in what was going on in the United States and what was going in Paris, because in Paris they were still ruled by the École de Paris. And in America, we had the advent of abstract expressionism and jazz. I mean, things that were thoroughly American. And here's an exposure of somebody coming from there, and his entire business model sort of changed based on what he learned.
And the resistance of French curators, really, up until today, almost, he said, about American art.
Sure.
This is a quote that he made. I will read it to you, so it was very interesting. Cultural actors participating in the artistic debate. We talked about art, artist galleries, not about the art market. Nowadays, I still keep defending my aesthetic values. I thought that was very, it was very nice that he was still aware of that. And he made an emphasis, and a number of the speakers emphasized as well, this question of collaboration with galleries, but also things are so fast today. And it's interesting, so many people have come to that, back to that. He also talked about prices. Rising crazy, came back to that. And the problem is the hollowing out of the middle range buyer. I know that mid-range sounds like a second-hand car, as you say, but you know, the doctors, the lawyers, the dentists. And he also spoke about investment not being was not really a topic when he started out.
Right.
And once again, collaboration. We just asked for our colleagues if we wanted to borrow something. And as you say, would that happen today?
You know, one of the things that I also remembered was the fact that this is somebody who had great connections to New York. I mean, he was really the emissary for so many of the most important artists at that time and the most avant-garde. But yet he kept saying, you know, I don't feel comfortable in North American culture.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't feel the need to open a
And
gallery
he never,
there.
no, he never extended.
Never did.
Yeah.
And he's been hugely successful for 51 years. So.
And we had quite an interesting question at the end, what to do if an artist isn't successful. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remembered his discussing it like in terms of a football team.
Yeah.
And he said, you don't always win in life, you don't always win in football. And even the most mediocre artists are sold these days because the market has the ability to absorb all of this. But he said, always tell the truth and be, again, another word, transparent. And I think it's a reality of our business. And he
Yes.
faced it.
And it is something that he regretted, actually. He talked about there's so much money around today, coming back to the prices, and it's got to go somewhere. So we then moved on to the panel, The Future for the Art Market at the Mid-Level. Once again, not second-hand cars, but there we go. And we started off with Claire McAndrew giving us some interesting facts from her reports and what she's looking at. The problem of the number of openings of galleries was collapsing, and the problems, as we know, at the mid-level, the top and the bottom are strong. The concentration of a few galleries into the top fairs. I'll perhaps let you, if you had anything to say on that, and then we'll move on to what Ursula had to say.
Well, it's interesting that here we have somebody who is compiling sort of hard data,
Yeah.
you know, and all of the things that we suspect are happening, she is translating through information that she receives. And so it's sort of a confirmation of what we expect. And so it moves us into the question, how do we deal with this? And interestingly enough, that's something that I thought Alan answered very well a little bit later on in the conversation, in that I think he said we should build a system, an economic system that is more focused on the mid-tier gallery and the mid-market, instead of everybody really trying to run after this tiny, narrow sliver that doesn't apply to most of our business models.
It was very nice having Ursula here to talk quite a lot about her project space, which encourages younger artists, but also it was fantastic. She was talking about the hierarchy, which she says it's terribly still hierarchy heavy, the art world. But I love the fact that she said, I fight for my life.
Yes.
And didn't she say, I'm going to die in my gallery?
She did. She did.
Which was very interesting.
Yeah.
She said, and I think a number of the speakers echoed that mid-sized galleries always struggle. But she said, today the younger ones, they want to be millionaires very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's a change.
And I think that the fact that she has for so long had this project space as well really shows the fact that she knows that the gallery is growing. She has this level of accomplishment and recognition internationally now, but yet it's still very, very important for her to keep she feels a social responsibility to helping and promoting younger artists. And she said, you know, the mega galleries they don't develop younger talent. And I think she genuinely feels that enriches her life and enriches her program. And it was wonderful to hear from somebody who's so successful.
Yeah, yeah. Continuing on, we had with us Jean-Claude, who's still here, I think, somewhere. He's had to go. Who told us that one of the problems was that again, confirmed. I mean, he confirmed that the mid-level had sort of collapsed, had disappeared. But one of the things that was interesting that he said when he closed, client said, oh, what a pity, you know, I would have bought something from you. It was a bit too late by then.
Yeah.
So he felt that other galleries, you know, there should be more support. Once again, we come back to collaboration and support. And he said this as well, it was interesting. You can't accept that we can't do things the way mega galleries can.
That's right.
So the mid-size has to carve out their own solutions.
Exactly.
Alain Servet made the very interesting and important point, which is how the whole art market is separating into a sort of luxury goods sector, which really, in a sense, is spun off and is, in a way, nothing to do with the art market anymore, is it?
No.
But it's there. He as well, collaboration and cooperation. And we also had Nana Decking, who talked about the online business.
Yes, and he said, "Look, it is the most opaque business in the world," and I think it is, aside from maybe the Grand Bazaar kind of mentality. Um, but he said, he felt that more people would trust this business genuinely if there was more information out there and more of a open database that they could access, so they feel like they covered. They felt like they covered the entire playing field. Public and private sales, auction results, artist histories, etc.
And that's what his company is working on.
Yes.
So tips. Review your strategies, change the organization and collaboration system, and focus on your core structures.
Yes.
Those are the tips from the whole panel. So then,
He did say one thing that I think we all kind of were taken aback by, which was that the online market is hopeless.
Yes. Well,
And-
in view of our last two panels,
Yeah, which I thought was very riveting. But it's as I look around, this is maybe a moment for me to also say it's interesting at a moment when we're having conversations that are about reaching new audiences and how to properly handle online platforms. None of our panelists say over 50 stayed for that. As I look around the room, I think I'm maybe the oldest person,
present company
I won't
accepted.
go there. But I just think it's interesting that they didn't feel it was necessary to be here for these things that I think are incredibly vital in terms of moving our business ahead into this
And accepting.
conversation.
Yeah.
So
So then Ossian Ward, who may still be with us, gave us a lovely presentation of the 500 shows and 50 years of Listen Gallery. It was opened in 1967 after Nicholas Logsdale was kicked out of art school. The focus of the gallery was very much at the beginning on really quite tough things, minimalist, conceptualist, and you have to think back to 1967 for that. The gallery had expanded to New York in 2016, and later on in our session we had Alex, his son, who came and talked about passing on. What was interesting, and Ossian has just emphasized creating a book, printed matter. So they produced this wonderful book with all 500 shows and with no editing. They didn't say, well, finally, we look back at that show, it wasn't so great. Everything is in there. And they had this amazing anniversary exhibition, which attracted over 100,000 people at the fight. It was really huge, yes. Yeah. Did you enjoy that presentation?
I did. I thought it was outstanding. And actually, the thing at the core of it for me was that Ossian talked about how Nicholas created this community around the gallery, the community of artists, and they were all about his own age. And I think that's something that is really one of the core values and identities of the Listen today.
Yeah.
People associate it with some of the original artists like John Latham in Art and Language as much as they do with Carmen Herrera and Cory Arcangel.
Absolutely.
But I think there's I really like the fact that that always remained part of Nicholas's vision, and they, despite all of the wonderful things that they've done enhancing artists globally, they've never lost sight of that. I mean, there's a purity that really remains there that I
And
respect.
this long trajectory, is set to continue with Alex, so that's
right.
great. A little tip came to us at the end: keep everything. Not everyone agreed with that, because some people said it's not possible, but keep every scrap of paper. And of course, it was very useful to Ossian when he was putting together the book. The next panel was about the delicate transition of passing your gallery on, which featured Alex Logsdale, David Judah. So different generations, David, who took over from his mother, Alex, who is taking over. With David Judah, it was a gradual handover, so it was smooth when his mother passed. She lived to a great age, and she was a wonderful dealer. In the case of Pereira Romero, it was quite interesting because he ended up employing his parents, which was quite an interesting situation. And in the case of Alex, he is still working with his parents, so that is happening gradually. The handover is happening gradually. I think what was interesting was that David Judah said that at the beginning people didn't want to talk to him, they wanted to talk to his mother. Right. So there's a question of finding your own identity. And also dealing with relationships that existed, but then you have to plug yourself in.
Sure.
Alex said something interesting. You share moral, sensibility, aesthetic sense, but of course you can't escape that. There's always that.
Absolutely.
And you need to prove yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The next panel was, I thought, very interesting, actually, and you were, of course, on it. So
I'm glad you found it interesting.
you were on it and very good. So first of all, we did have a presentation of what the Institute for Artists' Estate does. And obviously, as the art world professionalizes, so is this professionalizing. So choices about what to do before the artist passes or after his passing, but make those decisions early. We looked at the Tapier's model, where it's sort of combination of a foundation and a commercial gallery. And then you talking about how a gallery is involved with foundations.
Yeah, regularly. I mean, these are one of the things that was really important to me was the fact that it is never too early to start talking about this. And I have these conversations all the time with artists in their studio, even if it's about something formal with regard to a painting. And he'll say, well, he or she will say, if I'm going to do this or I'm going to do this, well, maybe I'll do this. And I will say, well, 50 years from now, I will, people are going to be asked, was this usual for the artist to be doing this? Is this damage? Is this rework? Is it the artist's hand? Did he usually paint over these areas? All sorts of things like this. Was this considered a sketch or was it actually considered a final work of art to enter the market? And I feel that asking these questions as a dealer is incredibly central to my role in protecting the legacy of the artist.
But interestingly, you said that it was tougher to talk to the older artists than the younger artists sometimes.
Yeah, because it was the issue of mortality.
Yeah.
It becomes more realistic, I think, at that point. And there are some who would simply go to a lawyer and sign a piece of paper that says, okay, these people are in charge of all the decisions, and maybe have falling outs with 2 or 3 of them and not to think to change it or advise their dealer that this was done. And you learn, unfortunately, after their passing, that there are many things that you would have liked to advise them of during the course of their life. And of course, at that point, it's too late.
It's too late, yes, absolutely. We also had on the same panel Christy McClear, was that his name? Yes, it is correct. Who now works for Sotheby's, and she said that a lot of estates were coming. This is something that's kind of worrying art dealers, isn't it? Because if auction houses are moving into the artists' estates business, we shall see.
I think people still don't have a clear idea of what Art Agency Partners does. It is owned by Sotheby's, but I think they are trying to carve out a niche, as we sort of discussed, that acts as a scaffolding to the things that foundations do and artists do in preparation for this.
For their foundations.
Yeah, and so that they don't make mistakes. They can speak to somebody who set this up for Philip Johnson, who set this up for Robert Rauschenberg, and know, Christy kept coming back to the idea, does the decision we're making really have to do with the core values and strategic planning for this artist? So that also people don't have nefarious self-interest that start to enter the decision-making process. And as many of us know from being on boards and committees, sometimes the loudest voice is not always the best or the smartest.
Absolutely. But she did make the point that it's helpful to the market if the state is well organized.
Yes.
Another thing we talked about with authentication, which is different in Europe, where a lot of boards, or foundations do authenticate. In America, it's become a complete nightmare. And
Correct.
most committees or foundations have withdrawn from doing it. There's been some very high-profile lawsuits. But Chrissy said you need to know who's in charge. I think we've done with that, this question of mortality, so we can... it was quite fun, though, at the end. We had this thing, people are irrational, never forget, The next one, the next presentation, which we had at the beginning this morning, we're moving on to this morning, was the FEAGA, or European Gallery Awards. Galleries that are made by the FEAGA, which is the European Federation. There's 2 sorts. There's 2 prizes every year. One is Lifetime Achievement. The other one is Innovation in a Young Gallery. They're not always... they're not always awarded. It depends on the candidates and who they see. Last year, it was Rosemary. They were both Lifetime Awards, Rosemary Schwarzwalder and Massimo Mini. But I think what was interesting as well was that Mr. Hilger made the point that of the importance of associations.
Yes.
You know, I think that was an important point. And, you know, don't complain if you're not happy the way things are going, if you haven't joined an association and attempted to support changes, attempts to change, for example, tax or droit de suite, which is quite a big issue in Europe, less so in America because you virtually don't have it except in California. And I thought there was a nice anecdote about Byler at the end. Do you remember
I did
what
too,
he
yes,
said?
about taking the Picasso prints down.
Yes.
And I wondered if that had happened today, what kind
Yes.
of conversation would have happened. Because as we know, some fairs, I think fairs in the UK have vetting. We do not necessarily in the US. I know TAFOF does. But would this have become a more complicated political situation, or was the fact that, you know, Mr. Hilger was very respectful of Mr. Byler's position as one of the founders of the fair, and probably really appreciated being there, and he was smart enough to, you know, follow in line.
Yes, yeah. And that was one of the reasons they gave, obviously for many other reasons as well, Byler got the Lifetime Achievement.
Yes.
Now, we had rather a contentious, this one, Gallerists and Art Advisors. It started, shall we say, in a robust manner, which is a journalistic way of saying that there was a little bit of an exchange of swords, shall we say. Lisa Schiff, who was there and I think is still here, I hope, defined the role of an art advisor as helping people navigate the art world, you know, and pointing out that you need both art history knowledge and you also need integrity. But Klaus Nodenhacker was not particularly enamoured of the role of art dealers and said so in a robust manner, shall we say.
Yes. It was spicy. I mean, but I'll tell you, the thing that I came away from it with were some really interesting ideas that were not adversarial, but rather I really deeply appreciated the fact that, you know, Lisa was talking about her role as an art advisor and that her responsibilities to her client, but yet this is somebody who is constantly engaging and driving business to art galleries and to opportunities to artists. This is not somebody who's taking them away. So it's, again, another form of this very constructive scaffolding that we have in the art world, where we have many more entities, online platforms and art advisors, etc. So you've got to learn how to work with them. And if you realize that they're actually here to help you make good things happen. I mean, I don't think Lisa mentioned once buying something at auction. I mean, she's very gallery-centric. She supports the system. She supports younger galleries and for certain
artists.
clients. So, and for certain galleries, she needs to look at blue chip things. I think one of the things that was very interesting was this notion that there needed to be a distinction drawn between advisors, people who really do collections management, as I call it, and what David Judo referred to as a runner.
Yes.
And a runner is really what we think of as a dealer. And Lisa was even saying, you know, if I force a sale, then I'm a dealer. And she's really careful not to be in that position because that's where that line gets blurred.
Now, there was also a bit of disagreement about whether there should be some sort of a code of practice, whether it should be regulated in some way, and there was a discussion about should they have a special badge like journalists at art fairs. So there was some disagreement. I think Klaus thought that there should be some sort of regulation, and Lisa said no, because finally the cream rises to the top and that your reputation is all.
See, this is the beauty of galleries collaborating too, because believe me, if somebody walks into my booth in a pair of Louboutins and an iPhone that I have never seen before and wants to buy something, and I don't know about their credibility, I will most likely call colleagues and I'll say, what do you know about this person? You know, and I think that's how we rely on each other for credibility. And I know that I do this with some of the other galleries in our network who share our artists around the world.
Yeah.
And I need their honest feedback about people. And then I thought what Vanessa was saying was very interesting too, you know, about getting these, you know, blind inquiries from people that don't even have sort of the dignity to address it properly. And at that point, our time is too valuable.
Yeah.
And we really need to focus on the relationships that we have, people who dedicate the time to pick up the phone call or send a detailed email. You know, we're not customer service representatives. You know, it's something much deeper than that. And if you want our time, we'll give it back, but you got to show it to us too.
In fact, I thought that this was actually really one of the panels that had a huge amount of engagement. And one of the things that David Judah said was that he was very balanced about this. He felt that there was a need for professionalised, but there was a sort of middle way. And he also said that there again, somebody else who said business is so speedy. And yes, and it was all going too fast, but that advisors can put in a lot of work educating clients, teaching about artists, so that you're not having to do that. They can take some of that, But he made the point that advisors are only on one side, whereas he said the gallery is on two sides, both for the collector and the artist, which Lisa did not necessarily agree with. But she does, and as the point you made, that she wants to work with galleries. Selling from the studio, slightly problematic. For Lisa, this is not acceptable. But then, is the gallery controlling their artists properly? And Vanessa, who was in the front row, made the point that one of the problems is that an advisor may not be interested in an artist when they see it in a small gallery, but then all of a sudden, if they move up...
Right.
So, and not
consumer
necessarily
confidence.
Consumer confidence. So... Vanessa was in fact on the next panel, which was each of the participants, the panelists, talked about collaboration. So Vanessa explained how she set up Condo, which is when host galleries of a city share space with visiting galleries. It's not for profit, and it came out of frustration with the proliferation of fairs and the problem of the falling footfall in galleries. She gave us some prices. It's very cheap. I mean, really, £650, $800 in the US, which really just covers the promotion costs, that map that they print, which is indeed absolutely awful. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right.
She knows that as well. And then Elizabeth D. Explained about independent, and this is an invitation-only fair, and they're again trying to produce something different from the big fairs. And she noted that this comes back to the question of collaboration, that it was bringing European galleries to America, and that as a result they extended to Brussels. And she has this very interesting Régence, which is a space which allows galleries to prolong shows. So it's sort of a hybrid between the art fair and having a gallery. And then we had John Martin, who explained about Cromwell Place, which is, he compared it a bit to the Fuller Breeding. Not something that is right for everyone. Vanessa pointed out that it's possibly not right for somebody like her, where she can allow an artist to trash her gallery, whereas, of course, this is a grade 2 listed building, and you have to be quite careful what you can do with it. And we also got some figures, which was nice. That's what it'll cost to go in there, which is expensive for a small gallery. And Vanessa made the point that that bigger galleries should be supporting. And I mean, do you have any examples, for example, in America, of a bigger gallery sort of giving space to a smaller gallery? Does that?
I know of these situations, and they tend to be either through financial assistance or through doing exhibitions together.
Yes.
Exactly, co-representing. I was extremely proud of this panel because we had 3 art dealers out here. And I honestly believe that art galleries are started by people who are inherently creative. And that's how they think. And then they sort of learn how to be business people. Some are better than others, clearly, as in any industry. And there were things that Vanessa, John, and Elizabeth all said that I think showed the willingness to think way outside of the box. I like the fact that Vanessa said, the art world has mimicked the corporate structure, and so anything not corporate has to be squeezed. And so Condo aims to create a festival of galleries with sort of a slower motive. And I appreciated that sort of noun of a festival of galleries. Not a
nice
fair.
Thing. Yes.
It was something different. And I love the fact that Elizabeth took this sort of what I read as an existential approach. Maybe because you went to Mount Holyoke or something. But it says, you addressed what does an exhibition model look like? I mean, this is the basis of what we do 10 times a year. And how do you do that in a bigger platform so that we're not just setting up a commercial enterprise in an art fair with our greatest hits, but we're actually doing something that's meaningful, but not necessarily within our bricks and mortar space. John also addressed this in this incredibly exquisite property.
Building, yes.
And
Well, series of buildings.
I love the fact that he said, we provide the most amazing facilities by consolidating everything. And we've been talking about cooperative efforts and consolidation. And I think it's a way, really, that a lot of the stronger, sort of more modestly scaled galleries, but with a certain revenue generating process, could actually use that to work for themselves if they got together and did something at the same time. I think it would be potentially very exciting, especially with those of us who are confined by New York architecture. To do something like that is just spectacular, you know.
And it's, I mean, independent is by invitation, and they also have, it's, you know, not anybody is going to be able to rock up to Cromwell Place. They also
Right.
have a selection process. So, you know, there is going to be an attempt to, you know, to make it, to have a certain level of quality, and also that the various galleries that are there do agree amongst themselves. You know, the galleries will invite each other, so to speak.
Yes.
This is a point that Elizabeth made. People, it's terrible to sort of quote you, whereas you would probably do much better quoting yourself, but that's the way the system works. And Elizabeth talked about partnerships and collaborations. We talked a little bit about it afterwards, and this is not the platform. It would be great to continue that conversation at another time, and perhaps more in depth. But also, watch her initiative is also a way of breaking down the hierarchy in the art world, which comes back to what Ursula said early in the session. So the last two sessions, I imagine almost everybody here sat through, so we will have sat through, so we will zip through them. I'd be interested in hearing what you felt about. I will just start, though, with Tim Schneider, who came and gave us a fantastic, you know, it's slightly a graveyard slot after lunch on the second day. You know, everyone's slightly nodding off.
It may be a graveyard slot, but he killed it.
Boy, did he wake us all
Sorry.
up. He would have woken up a corpse
Yeah,
in that.
yeah. Love
He
the
had
visuals.
He had great visuals.
Particularly the
He explained
Senate.
very well. He was quite robust, is I think the word we might use, about the figures and about the basis. But of course, they are the only figures we have. Talking about defining it, because this is one of the problems. You know, if you send somebody a JPEG, is that an online sale? And we also had this question, which was a long discussion about misconceptions about you know, if you put something on ArtNet or on Artsy. Well, obviously need to define what your aims are. I've put up all of the various pieces of some of the things that we discussed. I'd be interested to hear what you thought of that panel.
I thought it was terrific, actually, riveting, and I certainly was somebody who was asking questions because this is an area where, you know, sometimes I like to be as advanced as I possibly can, but frankly, I think I'm actually like most of the art world, which is we're in the information superhighway breakdown lane, you know, and we're just trying to figure out a way to get back on
It's
to
the rescue lane, yes.
Yeah, exactly, the rescue lane, exactly. I thought there were some very interesting things, particularly misconceptions. How do we get by
Yes,
this?
that was
I thought
interesting.
Saskia's point about, you know, where are we right now? We're at this moment where we've transferred from there's been this shift from should I do it to how do I do it? And I think that's what a lot of us are grappling with. I also couldn't help but think, you know, maybe because Tim put me in this area of visualization, and I'm thinking about art fairs, and I was thinking, damn, you know, are we going to get to a point where we like have an art fair, but it's actually like a group of ATMs, or sorry, what do you call them in London?
Cash
Cashports.
points,
And
yes.
you just go there and you sort of like, you know, the artwork's hanging around or whatever, and you sort of put your, you know, credit card in, and then you get a virtual conversation with somebody, or either
You might get a Wade Guyton out, though, on the other hand.
I pop onto the screen and I answer your
Yes.
questions there,
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
I've got your credit card chip, and we do the transaction, so I don't have to even go. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like this is getting into sort of Mad Max and
I don't
all of
believe
that.
it, but
I think the possibilities are super interesting. And if I could sit, on a chaise lounge in Saint-Tropez and FaceTime with a booth with art there and, visually shake people's hands and have a credit card machine, what does that do to us?
They tried it with VIP Art Fair, and it was a complete flop.
Yeah.
So
But that was
I
online.
think that was online. Yes.
This
yes.
is interactive.
This is interactive. Yes. Well, I think you will have to come back in 10 years' time, and we'll see how it's evolved since. And then our last panel was also on the same subject of online engaging new audiences. And here Ossian was great because he showed us his cat videos. I'm sorry, not his cat memes and his cat, which was actually a project by Corey Archangel. But he was really insistent about the content of a gallery. And content is king, as he said. And we had a really interesting little video, which was produced by Fitz & Co. for Art Basel, Meet the Gallerists, showing how you can make video. And video is very important today.
Sure.
Personally, I hate it when I get a video up that I haven't asked for. But
right.
I realise that I'm a bit of a dinosaur.
But I came away from that wanting to buy a Kreber.
There you go. You see?
But it's interesting because, again, we're talking about content. And I thought, if I had to give one phrase to each person's conversation, I thought Ossian's idea of we live in different art worlds constantly, and we're trying to figure a way to fuse them together.
Yes,
and Rebecca saying, learn who your audience is. And there's all this soft power that goes on around that actually reaches a crescendo in sales, but you really have to have that strong foundation on the cake before you can lead to the things that are more, where you get more of a ROI.
Yes.
And
yes.
Richard's was so poetic. I love this notion of a storytelling, telling stories. I mean, one of the things that I find in our business is that you go into a gallery, you go into a viewing room, and people want to talk to you about, and I'm not saying collectors, sometimes dealers, just reduce everything to prices, auction results, who they bought it, what museums they were in, etc., and a lot of data. And I think this is the moment when we can be on our stage to the best of our ability. And that's where it's up to us to become the storyteller. To tell the story about the artist, to tell the story about their use of material.
About the work of art itself, how it was
the whole thing.
conceived.
And I love the fact that this is transferred into something that's sort of romantic and appealing. And you just look at that article about Thomas Dane's new gallery, and it makes you kind of step back and take a breath of fresh air. And all this activity, all this stimulation, all these things that are going so fast all the time, it's like all of a sudden you're pausing, and it's still about the art. It's still gallery-centric, but it allows you to really appreciate all of the effort that goes into everything that we do every day.
I mean, one thing that came across very strongly was the question of quality. If you're going to, your online presence, your strategy, everything, it's a question of quality, the quality of the content. This came across very strongly. And I know that there are a lot of smaller galleries here. We had a couple of people from rather big agencies, but they have also ways of working with the smaller to perhaps create a strategy, but leave the gallery to execute it. So there are various solutions.
Sure.
And one of the points that Richard made, good relationship, building up a good relationship with the agency is important as well. So this is what they said. So I think for me, two conclusions. First of all, collaboration. And secondly, so many people said things go so fast today. So let's slow down. Now, one of the ways, of course, of slowing down, you don't have to run, is to go and get a drink upstairs. Thank you for your collaboration, and we'll see you at Talking Galleries next year.
Well done.
Thank you.